Imagine waking up every single morning feeling like your knees are made of rusty hinges, your hips screaming before you even take your first step out of bed. Now picture this. An 87-year-old grandmother in Okinawa, Japan, climbing stairs with more ease than most 50-year-olds in the Western world. What does she know that we don't? What is she doing differently that keeps her joints flexible, her movements graceful, and her independence intact well into her 9th decade of life? If you're over 50 and joint pain has become your unwelcome morning companion, what I'm about to share with you could genuinely transform how you move, how you feel, and how you age. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. The way we approach joint health in the Western world is fundamentally backwards. We wait until pain forces us to act, then we pop pills, avoid movement, and watch our bodies deteriorate even faster. Meanwhile, in Japan, particularly in the renowned blue zones where people routinely live past 100 with remarkable vitality, they've been practicing something entirely different. Something so simple, so gentle, yet so profoundly effective that it's keeping their joints lubricated, their muscles strong, and their independence secure for decades longer than most of us ever dream possible. Hello, I'm Dr. Sophia Reynolds, and I've spent over 25 years as a specialist in geriatric medicine and rehabilitative care. Throughout my career, I've treated thousands of patients struggling with joint pain, arthritis, and mobility issues. But what truly changed my approach to treating aging joints wasn't a new medication or a surgical technique. It was a research trip to Japan nearly 15 years ago, where I witnessed elderly individuals in their 80s and 90s moving with a fluidity and grace that seemed almost impossible given their age. Before we dive into these life-changing movements, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, I really encourage you to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss another health tip made especially for you. And if you find this video helpful, please leave your suggestions for future videos and your questions in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your feedback helps me create more content that can help more people just like you. Now, let me tell you about Mrs. Patricia Henderson, a 73-year-old retired librarian from Portland, Oregon, who came to see me about 3 years ago. Patricia had been suffering from severe knee osteoarthritis for nearly a decade. Every morning was a battle. She would wake up, swing her legs over the side of the bed, and feel that familiar grinding sensation that made her wince before her feet even touched the floor. Her orthopedic surgeon had recommended knee replacement surgery, but Patricia was terrified of going under the knife. She had seen her neighbor struggle through a difficult recovery, and honestly, she wasn't sure her heart could handle the anesthesia at her age. When she walked into my office that first day, she told me something that broke my heart. She said, "Dr. Reynolds, I used to walk through the stacks of the library for hours without thinking twice. I would shelve books on the top shelf, crouch down to organize the bottom shelf, and never once consider that my body might one day refuse to cooperate. Now I can barely make it from my bedroom to the kitchen without needing to rest." The resignation in her voice was something I had heard countless times before. That quiet acceptance that this is simply what aging means, that pain and limitation are inevitable companions to growing older. But I knew there was another way. I introduced Patricia to a series of gentle movements inspired by practices I had observed in Japan, movements that have been part of daily life there for generations. Within 6 weeks, Patricia called my office in tears. Not tears of pain, but tears of joy. She had walked around her entire block without stopping, something she hadn't been able to do in over 3 years. Her knees still had osteoarthritis. The cartilage hadn't magically regenerated, but her pain had decreased by what she described as at least 60%, and her mobility had improved dramatically. This is what I want for you. Not a miracle cure, because those don't exist, but a real, sustainable improvement in how your joints feel and function. So let's explore these 6 movements together. The first movement is something I call the morning awakening circles, and it's one of the most fundamental practices I observed during my time in Japan. In traditional Japanese culture, mornings often begin not with rushing out of bed, but with gentle, intentional movement designed to prepare the body for the day ahead. This particular practice focuses on awakening every major joint in your body through slow, circular motions. Let me tell you about Mr. Robert Williams, an 81-year-old former construction worker from Denver, Colorado. Robert spent 45 years working with his hands, lifting heavy materials, climbing scaffolding, and putting tremendous stress on every joint in his body. By the time he retired at 67, his shoulders were so stiff he could barely lift his arms above his head. His wrists ached constantly from decades of gripping tools, and his ankles, well, they hadn't rotated smoothly in years. Robert was a proud man. He had built buildings that still stand today, homes where families raised their children, but he couldn't button his own shirt without his wife Martha's help. The shame he felt about this simple admission brought tears to his eyes when he first told me. "I built skyscrapers," he said, "and now I can't fasten my own buttons." I taught Robert the morning awakening circles, a practice that takes about 5 minutes and involves slowly rotating each major joint through its full range of motion. You start with your neck, making slow circles, first clockwise, then counterclockwise. Then you move to your shoulders, your wrists, your hips, your knees, and finally your ankles. The key is gentleness and intention. You're not forcing anything. You're simply reminding each joint of its natural capacity for movement, encouraging the production of synovial fluid, which is your body's natural joint lubricant. After 3 months of practicing these circles every single morning before getting out of bed, Robert called me with news that made me smile for days. He had buttoned his own shirt, every single button, from collar to hem, without any help. His wife Martha cried. He cried. And honestly, when he told me the story, I felt my own eyes getting misty. This is why I do this work. Not for the complex cases or the surgical interventions, but for these moments of restored dignity and independence. If you're still watching and finding these insights valuable, drop a quick comment below just to let me know you're with me. It really helps more than you know. The second movement is what the Japanese call gentle morning stretches, though I've adapted it slightly for Western bodies that may have spent decades sitting in office chairs and car seats. This practice comes from a tradition of starting each day with movements that elongate the spine and open the hips, areas where most of us hold tremendous tension and restriction. I want to tell you about Mrs. Elizabeth Carter, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher from Atlanta, Georgia. Elizabeth had taught 3rd grade for 35 years. She loved her students fiercely, remembered the names of children she had taught decades ago, and still received letters from former students who had gone on to become doctors, lawyers, and teachers themselves. But those 35 years of bending over small desks, crouching to tie little shoes, and standing for hours during lessons had taken a severe toll on her lower back and hips. When Elizabeth came to see me, she was walking with a pronounced forward lean. Her hip flexors had become so shortened and tight from years of sitting and bending that she physically couldn't stand up straight anymore. The pain in her lower back was constant, a dull ache that sharpened into stabbing sensations whenever she tried to straighten up. She told me she had stopped attending church because she couldn't sit in the pews for more than 15 minutes without excruciating discomfort, and she was too embarrassed to be the one person standing in a seated congregation. The gentle stretching practice I taught Elizabeth focuses on slowly lengthening the muscles that become chronically shortened in our modern lifestyle. It involves a series of movements performed while lying on your back, allowing gravity to assist rather than resist your body. You gently draw one knee toward your chest, holding it there for several breaths, then extend that leg while drawing the other knee in. You let your knees fall to one side, then the other, creating a gentle ringing motion through your spine. Each movement is held for several seconds, allowing your muscles time to release their grip and remember what length feels like. Elizabeth practiced these stretches every morning for 4 months. The change was gradual, but undeniable. First, she noticed she could stand slightly taller. Then she realized she was walking with less forward lean. 6 months after starting this practice, Elizabeth attended her granddaughter's wedding. She sat through the entire ceremony without discomfort, stood for photographs afterward, and even danced, something she had been certain she would never do again. When she sent me a photo of herself on that dance floor, her smile was so radiant it practically glowed through my computer screen. The third movement is something truly remarkable, and it's called grounding balance work. This practice is deeply rooted in Japanese tradition, where maintaining balance is considered essential not just for physical health but for mental and spiritual well-being. In Japan, elderly individuals often practice standing on one leg while performing everyday activities like brushing their teeth or waiting for water to boil. It seems almost too simple to be effective, but the science behind it is profound. Balance isn't just about not falling, although preventing falls is certainly critical for anyone over 50. When you challenge your balance, you're activating hundreds of small stabilizing muscles throughout your body, muscles that often atrophy from disuse in our chair-bound culture. You're also strengthening the neural pathways that control coordination and proprioception, your body's ability to sense where it is in space. This has direct benefits for joint health because stable, well-coordinated muscles put less stress on joint structures. Let me share the story of Mr. James Thompson, a 76-year-old retired accountant from Chicago, Illinois. James had always been what he called the clumsy type. Even in his younger years, he was the one who tripped over curbs, bumped into door frames, and knocked over glasses at dinner parties. His wife Linda used to joke that she fell in love with him despite his two left feet. But as James aged, his poor balance became less of a charming quirk and more of a serious danger. At 74, James fell in his backyard while walking to the garden shed. He broke his wrist trying to catch himself and badly bruised his hip. The fall terrified him. He had read the statistics, knew that hip fractures in elderly men often marked the beginning of a rapid decline. After that fall, James essentially stopped going outside. He was too afraid of uneven ground, too worried about another fall. His world shrank to the interior of his house, and even there, he moved with a fearful, shuffling gait that actually increased his fall risk rather than reducing it. When I introduced James to grounding balance work, he was skeptical. Standing on one leg? That was for yoga enthusiasts and athletes, not 76-year-old accountants with two left feet. But I convinced him to try, starting with the most basic version, simply standing next to a wall with one hand touching it for support and lifting one foot just an inch off the ground. He could manage about 5 seconds before needing to put his foot down. We progressed slowly. After a month, James could stand on one leg for 15 seconds with light wall support. After 3 months, he could do 30 seconds without touching the wall at all. After 6 months, something remarkable happened. James went back outside, not just to his porch, but all the way to his garden shed. He walked across the uneven ground of his yard with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. His wife Linda called me, laughing and crying at the same time. "I have my husband back," she said. "He's out there right now, pulling weeds like he's 40 years old." But if you thought that was impressive, wait until you hear about the fourth movement. This one targets an area that most Western exercise programs completely ignore: the ankles and feet. In Japan, where people traditionally sat on the floor and removed their shoes indoors, ankle flexibility remained a natural part of daily life well into old age. In the West, we've lost this. Our shoes restrict our feet, our chairs eliminate the need for ankle mobility, and by the time we're in our 60s or 70s, many of us have ankles that barely move at all. This matters more than most people realize. Your ankles are the foundation of your entire kinetic chain. When your ankles are stiff and immobile, your knees compensate. When your knees are overtaxed, your hips take on extra burden. When your hips are struggling, your lower back suffers. One study I reviewed found that limited ankle mobility was a stronger predictor of walking difficulty in elderly adults than knee or hip arthritis. That's how important your ankles are. The ankle awakening practice involves gentle rotations and flexions of the feet and ankles, performed either seated or lying down. You point your toes away from you, then flex them back toward your shin. You make circles with your feet, first in one direction, then the other. You spread your toes apart, then scrunch them together. These movements might seem trivial, but they're maintaining and restoring the mobility that allows your entire lower body to function properly. Mrs. Dorothy Martinez, a 79-year-old grandmother from San Antonio, Texas, came to me after a series of unexplained falls. She hadn't tripped over anything, hadn't slipped on wet floors. She simply lost her balance while standing in her kitchen, in her bedroom, in her living room. Her family was terrified. They were discussing whether Dorothy needed to move into an assisted living facility because they couldn't trust her to be alone anymore. When I examined Dorothy, I discovered that her ankles had almost no mobility whatsoever. She couldn't flex her feet upward at all, and her circles were more like tiny wobbles than actual rotations. Years of wearing narrow dress shoes for her job as a bank teller, combined with a sedentary retirement, had essentially frozen her ankles in place. Without that ankle mobility, her body couldn't make the tiny adjustments needed to maintain balance during normal activities. I started Dorothy on the ankle awakening practice, beginning with the gentlest possible movements. At first, she could barely perceive any motion at all. But gradually, over weeks and months, her ankles began to remember how to move. Her range of motion increased millimeter by millimeter, and as her ankle mobility returned, her unexplained falls stopped, completely stopped. Dorothy is still living independently in her own home at 82. She recently sent me a video of herself dancing with her great-grandson at his birthday party. Her ankles were moving beautifully. If you're finding this information helpful, please do me a favor and share this video with someone you love who might benefit from it. Joint pain affects so many people, and sometimes the simplest solutions never reach the people who need them most. The fifth movement is what I call the seated flowing sequence, and it's particularly valuable for anyone who struggles with standing exercises or who has limited mobility. This practice is inspired by movements I observed in Japanese community centers, where groups of elderly individuals would gather each morning to move together while seated in chairs. There was something beautiful about watching these gatherings, the sense of community, the gentle encouragement, the shared commitment to maintaining health and independence. The seated flowing sequence involves a series of continuous movements performed while sitting in a sturdy chair. You begin by slowly turning your head from side to side, letting your gaze follow the movement. Then, you add your shoulders, rotating your upper body as far as comfortable in each direction. Your arms sweep through the air in gentle arcs, your hands opening and closing. Your feet lift and lower, your ankles rotate. The key is that all these movements flow together continuously, creating a gentle, rhythmic pattern that engages every joint in your body without ever requiring you to bear weight on painful knees or unstable ankles. Mr. Walter Chen was an 84-year-old retired professor of literature from Boston, Massachusetts. He had spent his career exploring the depths of human experience through books, teaching generations of students to find meaning in the written word. But Parkinson's disease had stolen much of his physical freedom. His tremors made standing exercises dangerous, and his balance was too compromised for traditional movement practices. When his daughter brought him to see me, Walter was deeply depressed. He felt trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him, cut off from the physical world by a neurological condition he couldn't control. The seated flowing sequence was perfect for Walter. He could do it safely, without risk of falling. The continuous, rhythmic nature of the movements actually seemed to help with his tremors, giving his brain a flowing pattern to follow rather than fighting against his involuntary movements. We adapted the sequence to his specific needs, making the movements smaller or larger depending on the day, always prioritizing safety while maintaining the essential qualities of flow and continuity. After 8 months of daily practice, Walter's daughter called me with an update that left me speechless. Walter had regained enough mobility and confidence to attend a poetry reading at his local library. He had stood up with assistance and recited a poem he had written about movement and stillness, about the body's betrayal and the spirit's persistence. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Walter told me later that it was one of the proudest moments of his life. Not because his Parkinson's was cured, it wasn't, but because he had found a way to continue participating in life despite his limitations. Now we arrive at the sixth and final movement, one that ties everything together. I call it the gratitude walking meditation, and it combines physical movement with mental awareness in a way that the Japanese have understood for centuries. This isn't just walking, it's intentional, mindful walking that treats each step as a deliberate act worthy of attention and appreciation. In our rush Western culture, walking is usually just transportation, a way to get from one place to another as quickly as possible. But in Japanese tradition, walking can be a practice unto itself, an opportunity to cultivate awareness, gratitude, and presence. When you walk with intention, paying attention to how each foot meets the ground, how your weight shifts, how your joints move and support you, something remarkable happens. Your gait becomes smoother, your movements become more efficient, and the stress on your joints actually decreases. Mrs. Margaret O'Brien was a 71-year-old retired nurse from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She had spent her career caring for others, often neglecting her own health in the process. By the time she retired, her joints were worn from years of standing during 12-hour shifts, lifting patients and rushing through hospital corridors. But what troubled Margaret most wasn't the physical pain. It was the mental exhaustion, the sense that she had given everything to her profession and had nothing left for herself. When I introduced Margaret to the gratitude walking meditation, I could see her skepticism. She was a practical woman, a nurse who believed in evidence and outcomes. Walking slowly and thinking grateful thoughts seemed like something from a self-help book, not a legitimate medical intervention. But I asked her to try it for just 2 weeks, just to see how it felt. Margaret started with 5 minutes of intentional walking each morning, focusing on the sensation of each step, silently noting things she was grateful for, her functioning lungs, her beating heart, her legs that still carried her forward. She paid attention to her joints, not with frustration at their limitations, but with appreciation for what they could still do. She noticed how the ground felt beneath her feet, how the air moved around her, how her body orchestrated hundreds of tiny adjustments to keep her balanced and moving. The effect was profound. Margaret told me that within the first week, her morning pain had decreased significantly. Within a month, she was walking for 30 minutes each day. But more importantly, her entire outlook had shifted. She was no longer focused on what her body couldn't do. She was marveling at what it could do, at the incredible complexity of human movement that she had studied as a nurse, but never truly appreciated until now. "I spent 40 years taking care of other people's bodies," she told me. "And I never really saw my own body as something to be grateful for. Now I do." This brings me to some final thoughts I want to share with you. What these 6 movements have in common, what makes them so effective, is not complexity or intensity. It's consistency and intention. The Japanese elders I observed didn't do these movements occasionally when they remembered or when pain forced them to act. They did them every single day, as naturally as brushing their teeth or eating breakfast. Movement wasn't something separate from life. It was woven into the fabric of daily existence. I also want to be very clear about something important. These movements are not a replacement for medical care. If you have severe joint problems, if you've been diagnosed with arthritis or other conditions, please continue working with your healthcare providers. These practices are meant to complement medical treatment, not replace it. They're about taking an active role in your own health, doing what you can do each day to support your body and maintain your independence. The patients I've shared with you today, Patricia, Robert, Elizabeth, James, Dorothy, Walter, and Margaret, they all had one thing in common. They were willing to try something new. They were willing to be patient, to start small, to trust the process even when results didn't come immediately. And every single one of them experienced meaningful improvement in their quality of life. Not because they found a miracle cure, but because they showed up every day and did the work. If you're sitting there right now, feeling that familiar ache in your knees or stiffness in your hips, I want you to know that improvement is possible. Not overnight, not without effort, but possible. Your joints have more capacity for healing and adaptation than you might believe. Your body wants to move. It was designed to move. And when you give it the right kind of movement, gentle, consistent, intentional, it responds. Start with just one of these movements tomorrow morning. Pick the one that seems most relevant to your situation, or simply start with the morning awakening circles since they address every major joint. Do it for 5 minutes. Then do it again the next day and the next. After a week, add another movement. Build slowly, patiently, like the Japanese elders who taught me that aging doesn't have to mean decline. I would strongly encourage you to discuss these movements with your own doctor, especially if you have any underlying health conditions or concerns. Bring this video to your next appointment if you'd like. A good physician will be happy to help you adapt these practices to your specific situation. And please, come back and tell me how it goes. Share your experiences in the comments below. Tell me which movement you started with, what challenges you faced, what improvements you noticed. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take that first step toward better joint health. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you for caring enough about your health to seek out information and solutions. And thank you for trusting me to guide you on this journey. I truly believe that what I've shared with you today can make a meaningful difference in your life, just as it has for so many of my patients over the years. Take care of yourself, move gently, be patient, and never, ever stop believing that better days are possible. I'll see you in the next video.